The parade ground of Harkon, 5 stretched wide beneath a violet sky, the assembled war machines of the Vorthan Dominion gleaming under the twin suns. Hover tanks, sleek and humming with barely restrained power, floated effortlessly above the alloy-plated surface, their plasma cannons idle but menacing. Towering above them, Dominion officials stood in their ceremonial battle regalia, golden crests polished, tusked faces twisted in amusement. Colonel Jack Dempsey kept his face expressionless as he surveyed the alien spectacle, but deep inside, a cold anger simmered. They weren't even trying to hide it, the laughter, the condescension. It radiated from them like heat off reactor coils. "They're sure impressed with themselves," Sergeant Leroy Carter muttered beside him, arms crossed over his chest. "Let 'em be," Dempsey said. "They'll learn soon enough." A low, guttural voice boomed over the comms. General Kavos, the Dominion's senior warlord, spread his 4 arms in mock magnanimity. "Earth forces, behold the pinnacle of warfare. Your invitation here is a courtesy, one afforded to all newcomers before they are absorbed into the Dominion's grand military structure. Today, you will witness the future of war." Dempsey didn't bother responding. The arrogance was nothing new. The United States, despite its history of warfare and military innovation, was considered little more than a curiosity in the wider galaxy. Dominion analysts had studied Earth's battlefields, scoffing at the primitive reliance on treaded vehicles, projectile weaponry, human crews. In their eyes, war had evolved beyond steel and grit. It was now the domain of hovering death machines, shielded titans operated by neural-linked AI. Then came the real insult. A section of the parade ground split open, revealing a colossal pit, a combat arena lined with energy barriers. Inside, a dozen of Earth's finest armored units sat in disciplined formation, painted in desert camo. The Abrams X-2 main battle tank, the latest evolution of a design that had endured centuries, rumbled as its engines idled. The steel beasts, all 68 tons of them, looked almost crude beside the elegant alien hovercraft positioned across the arena. Kavos gestured toward them with casual disdain. "You are welcome to demonstrate the capabilities of our relics. Consider it an opportunity to amuse our gathered commanders." Lieutenant Miguel Vasquez, standing atop one of the Abrams, spat onto the ground. "So we're the opening act in their little circus." "Good," Dempsey said. "Time to give them a damn show." The rules of the war games were straightforward. 3 rounds, no live munitions, victory determined by simulated kill shots via advanced tracking systems. A Dominion Legionnaire, one of their elite armored units, stood to the side with a bored expression, waiting for Dempsey's command to begin. The American tanks surged forward. Their crews, hand-picked veterans from countless battles, moved with precise discipline, taking up flanking positions, aiming their 120mm smoothbore cannons at the sleek Dominion hovercraft. The Abrams X-2S were faster than their predecessors, upgraded for off-world deployment, equipped with composite armor that could withstand even high-yield plasma bursts. It didn't matter. The first exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Plasma bolts erupted from the Dominion hover tanks in rapid succession, their projectiles leaving streaks of blue energy in the air. The Abrams fired back, their sabot rounds striking shields that didn't buckle, didn't flicker, didn't even dent. The Dominion craft maneuvered effortlessly, strafing sideways, accelerating faster than any treaded vehicle could dream of. Within seconds, 3 Abrams were marked as destroyed, their systems registering the simulated hits. Vasquez slammed his fist against his tank's control panel. "We're not even scratching them." Carter growled into the radio. "Tanks can't fight what they can't hit." Dempsey already knew. The Abrams were outclassed in every possible way. The Dominion vehicles could absorb their best shots while responding with firepower that, had it been real, would have melted through their armor like paper. By the time the exercise ended, all 12 Abrams were marked as destroyed. The Dominion forces had lost none. A roar of laughter erupted from the alien officers watching the spectacle. Kavos himself clapped his 4 hands together, grinning with sharp teeth. A spirited display. If nothing else, your kind has passion. He turned to one of his aides. We should preserve one of these machines for a museum. A fascinating relic. Dempsey's jaw clenched. He forced himself to stand rigid, to show no reaction. The same could not be said for his men. Vasquez looked murderous. Carter kicked at the dirt, and McBride, hot-headed as ever, had to be physically held back by two others. As the Abrams crews climbed out of their machines, Dominion officers approached with mocking curiosity, some even posing for holographic images beside the tanks, as though they were ancient artifacts unearthed from a ruin. One officer, taller than the rest, stepped forward and sneered. How many centuries has your species been using these machines? Dempsey stared at him. Long enough to know a fight's never over after the first round. The alien smirked, shaking his head. You people so stubborn. But the Dominion values warriors, even when they are quaint. Your defeat today is a kindness. It spares you from learning the truth in real combat. Dempsey nodded. Appreciate the concern. The officer chuckled. What will you do now? Develop larger treads? A bigger cannon? More laughter from the gathered crowd. Accept your place. The future of war is beyond you. Dempsey glanced at his men, saw the fire behind their eyes, the way their hands clenched into fists, the way Vasquez muttered in Spanish under his breath, the way Carter glared like a man holding back a storm. They weren't beaten. Not yet. Dempsey turned back to the alien, offering a slow, measured smile. We'll see. The transport bay of the U.S.S. Washington hummed with activity, the rhythmic clang of tools against steel underscoring the quiet tension that had settled over the tank crews. The Abrams X-2S, once pristine, bore the marks of humiliation, scorched paint, dents from simulated blasts, and the invisible weight of failure. Colonel Jack Dempsey stood near the lead tank, arms folded, watching as Lieutenant Miguel Vasquez knelt by an exposed armor panel, muttering under his breath as he pried open a section of plating. Sparks danced as he welded something inside, a scowl etched deep into his face. Sergeant Leroy Carter leaned against a supply crate, his expression grim. We got played out there, sir. Hard. Dempsey nodded. There was no denying it. The Dominion War doctrine had evolved beyond anything Earth's forces had encountered before. Shielded armor that turned their sabot rounds into useless splinters, hovercraft capable of evasive maneuvers no tracked vehicle could match, and weapons that rendered even the toughest reactive plating meaningless. The reports were worse than expected. Dominion officers had officially dismissed American armor as obsolete, and whispers of Earth's inferiority were spreading through the military ranks of allied species. If the U.S. wanted to be taken seriously in interstellar combat, they needed more than pride. They needed a way to break those shields. Vasquez let out a frustrated growl and slammed his wrench onto the hull. I've been going over the combat data. Their shields work on a frequency-shifting energy matrix. Our rounds lose kinetic force before impact because the shields are dispersing the force over a wider surface area. Private Thomas Haas McBride, sitting on a crate nearby, frowned. So what? We just shoot more. Carter shot him a look. Yeah, that's real helpful, Haas. Vasquez stood, wiping sweat from his forehead. I'm saying we need a round that disrupts the field before it lands. Something that punches through before they can adjust frequencies. Dempsey exhaled, considering. And how do we do that? Vasquez hesitated. Then, cautiously, he said, we mix kinetic energy with an electromagnetic pulse. If we can fire a round that delivers an ultra-short EMP burst on impact, it could create a fractional gap in the shielding, long enough for a secondary penetrator to get through. Silence. Carter straightened. We talking a two-stage sabot? Exactly. Vasquez's eyes lit up. First stage delivers the EMP pulse, shorting out a tiny section of the shield. Second stage follows through before the shield can recover. McBride scratched his head. Can we even make something like that? Dempsey looked at Vasquez. How long would it take? Vasquez hesitated, then squared his shoulders. If we get full engineering support? A working prototype in 2 weeks. A reliable combat-ready version? A month. Dempsey gave a slow nod. It wasn't soon enough, but it would have to do. Then his radio crackled. "Colonel, we have a priority transmission from Washington. You're going to want to hear this." Minutes later, Dempsey and his men gathered in the briefing room, the holographic display casting a blue glow over the steel walls. Major Alan Reeves, their strategic coordinator, stood at the front, arms locked behind his back, his sharp gaze scanning them. "Listen up," Reeves said, tone clipped. "The Dominion is launching an offensive against a rebellious human colony on Epsilon 9. Word is they're planning a complete eradication, civilians, infrastructure, everything. We have 2 weeks before the assault begins." A cold silence filled the room. McBride clenched his fists. "So what? We just let it happen?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Reeves gestured to the display. "Command wants options. The brass is hesitant to engage directly, considering how badly we got embarrassed in the war games. They don't want to throw our forces into a losing fight." Carter scoffed. "So they're just going to sit on their hands and let those people die?" "Not if we can prove we're ready," Dempsey said, eyes narrowing. Reeves nodded. "Exactly. If we can demonstrate that our armor isn't obsolete, if we can prove the Abrams can stand up to the Dominion, they'll authorize an intervention. But that means we need results. Fast." Vasquez exhaled. "We need those shield-breaker rounds working before the battle kicks off." "Then we work double time," Dempsey said. "Carter, coordinate with the engineers. Vasquez, get me schematics for the new rounds. Haas, you're on field testing. We push these tanks to their limit and make sure they don't fail when it counts." McBride grinned. "Finally, something we can hit back with." Reeves studied them, then gave a single nod. "You've got 10 days. Don't waste them." The next week was a storm of activity. The shield-breaker rounds went from concept to prototype at breakneck speed. Vasquez worked like a man possessed, running tests on modified tungsten penetrators, fine-tuning the EMP disruptor pulse that would crack Dominion shielding wide open. Carter focused on the armor problem, developing a modular reactive plating system capable of absorbing plasma bursts without compromising mobility. The engineers used a layered ablative design, dispersing energy on impact instead of trying to outright resist it. Every day, the tanks were driven harder. They ran live-fire simulations, tested shock absorbers against plasma strikes, and forced their crews to operate on little to no sleep, because in battle, there were no second chances. Then came the first live test. A controlled engagement in a simulated combat zone, Abrams tanks squaring off against Dominion-style hover drones equipped with full shielding. The rounds fired. The EMP stage detonated. The shields flickered. The follow-through penetrators hit home, shattering the drones on impact. For the first time, a Dominion-style shield had been broken by human weapons. Vasquez hooped, slamming a fist against the hull. "It works. Holy hell, it actually works." Dempsey let out a slow breath. They had a fighting chance now. But the battle for Epsilon 9 loomed ahead. And there was only one way to see if their new weapons would hold up against the real thing. The battlefield of Epsilon 9 stretched before them, a wasteland of cracked earth and burning skies. Dominion assault landers descended in formation, their sleek hulls gleaming under the planet's dim sun. The colony's defenses had already collapsed. The outer perimeter lay in ruins, charred wreckage marking where automated turrets had been overwhelmed. What little resistance remained had fallen back to the last fortified stronghold, a cluster of prefabricated buildings encircled by crumbling barriers. Colonel Jack Dempsey peered through his tank's periscope, watching as hover tanks in the Dominion vanguard surged forward, their energy shields rippling in the heat. The enemy was moving with calculated precision, confident in their technological superiority, the same arrogance they had displayed in the war games. They expected this to be an execution. Dempsey's voice was calm as he keyed his radio. "All units, stand by. Wait for my mark." In the trench beside his Abrams, Sergeant Leroy Carter hunkered down with a squad of infantry, their anti-armor launchers prepped. Behind them, Lieutenant Miguel Vasquez worked frantically with a field engineer, fine-tuning the last of the shield breaker rounds. From the comms, Private Thomas, Haas, McBride sounded impatient. "Sir, we got incoming. You sure about waiting?" Dempsey watched the Dominion tanks close the distance. 500 meters. 400. The first plasma bolts shrieked through the air, slamming into cover, sending chunks of reinforced concrete spiraling skyward. "Steady," he ordered. The Dominion commander, a towering Vorthan in blood-red armor, stood atop his command vehicle, for arms spread wide in a display of dominance. His voice boomed over loudspeakers, translated into crude, grating English. "You have been abandoned by your leaders. Your colony is forsaken. Surrender, and your deaths will be swift." Dempsey smirked. "Open fire." The Abrams X-2S roared to life, their cannons unleashing the first volley of shield breaker rounds. The Dominion tanks didn't even attempt to dodge, relying on their shields, just as expected. The first shells struck, detonating in brief, blinding flashes of blue energy. The effect was immediate. The Dominion shields flickered, their matrices disrupted by the electromagnetic pulses. A fraction of a second later, the secondary tungsten penetrators hit home. Armor crumpled. Turrets exploded. The battlefield erupted into chaos as the once invulnerable Dominion tanks were suddenly reduced to burning husks, their crews scrambling from the wreckage in stunned disbelief. For the first time in 1,000 years, Dominion armor had been breached in open combat. Carter whooped over the radio. "Hot damn. We cracked them." But there was no time to celebrate. The second wave was already advancing. Faster, more evasive, their formations adjusting to compensate. The Dominion commander had realized the danger, and now their hover tanks were using hit-and-run tactics, refusing to be stationary targets. Dempsey's instincts kicked in. Break formation. Use the terrain. Keep them from getting clear shots. The Abrams surged forward, moving through the ruined colony streets, using debris for cover as they fired round after round. The Dominion tanks returned fire, blue plasma bolts searing the air, barely missing their targets. The old doctrine had always been about brute strength, superior tech, but they weren't used to fighting an enemy that adapted. McBride's voice crackled through the comms. "Sir, their command tank is hanging back, directing fire. If we take it out..." "I see it." At the edge of the battlefield, the Dominion command vehicle hovered like a spider in the web, coordinating the attack. Its shields were stronger, its armor thicker. But not invincible. Dempsey switched channels. "Vasquez, get me a direct line to engineering." A second later, Chief Engineer Wallace's gruff voice answered. "What do you need?" "We got one big bastard holding their lines together. I need everything we've got to crack it open." A pause. "Then, we have a prototype. It's untested." Dempsey didn't hesitate. "Load it." Minutes later, a single massive round was locked into the main cannon of Dempsey's tank, a hybrid shield breaker high-explosive payload designed to detonate inside once it penetrated enemy armor. Carter's voice cut in. "Sir, you missed this shot. We might not get another." Dempsey took a slow breath. "I won't." Through the periscope, he lined up the shot. The command tank's shield shimmered, still intact, its crew blissfully unaware that they had already lost. Dempsey fired. The initial EMP burst slammed into the target, disrupting its energy matrix for a fraction of a second, just long enough. The follow-up high-velocity penetrator ripped through the hull, burrowing deep before detonating in a sunburst of fire and steel. The Dominion commander had just enough time to scream before the tank vanished in a wave of destruction. Silence. Then the Dominion forces wavered. Without their leader, without their shields to protect them, the remaining tanks hesitated, and in war, hesitation was death. Dempsey's voice rang over the comms. "All units, press the attack." The Abrams surged forward, their treads crushing the scorched ground as round after round found their targets. One by one, the remaining Dominion forces fell, their burning wrecks littering the colony outskirts. And then it was over. The Dominion had been stopped. For the first time in their history, their battle doctrine had failed them. McBride exhaled. Holy hell, we did it. Vasquez leaned against the smoking hull of his tank, exhaustion in his voice. They're gonna be pissed. Dempsey climbed onto his tank, scanning the battlefield. The fires still burned. The air smelled of ozone and steel. The bodies of Dominion warriors lay scattered among their wreckage. He picked up the radio, sending a message back to U.S. High Command. Mission accomplished. But in the distance past the burning wreckage, something loomed, something bigger, heavier, crawling out of the atmospheric haze. The Dominion wasn't done yet, and the real battle was just beginning. The ground trembled. A deep, unnatural vibration rolled through the ruined battlefield, sending loose rubble skittering across the scorched earth. Dempsey steadied himself against the turret of his Abrams, eyes locked on the monstrosity emerging from the dust cloud. It was massive. 3 times the size of any Dominion tank they had faced, its hull a hulking slab of black alloy, shimmering with an energy field far denser than the standard Dominion shielding. Where the previous hover tanks had been sleek and agile, this behemoth was a fortress on a battlefield. Its main cannon, a spinal-mounted weapon pulsing with violet plasma, tracked toward them with eerie precision. Carter's voice crackled over the radio. "Sir, what the hell is that?" Vasquez, still catching his breath near his tank, answered grimly. "That's a Cataclysm-class siege walker. I read about them in intelligence reports, never seen one in action. They're supposed to be deployable only in planetary extinction scenarios." McBride let out a low whistle. "Guess they took this ass-kicking personally." Dempsey grimaced. They had cracked the Dominion's armor, shattered their vanguard, but now the enemy was escalating. He had seen it before. When an empire was wounded, it lashed out with everything it had left. The siege walker took its first step forward. The ground shuddered beneath its weight. A warning tone blared inside the Abrams, target lock detected. Dempsey didn't hesitate. Asterisk, asterisk, disperse. Now asterisk, asterisk. The plasma cannon fired. A column of violet energy lanced downward, annihilating everything in its path. The spot where McBride's tank had been a second earlier erupted into a crater of molten rock. He had barely managed to swerve out of the blast radius, the heat washing over his vehicle like an open furnace. "Jesus, this thing is going to turn us into scrap." Carter's voice cut through the chaos. "Sir, I don't think our rounds will punch through that shield. That thing's built to withstand orbital strikes." Dempsey cursed under his breath. They needed a new strategy. His mind worked fast. The shield breaker rounds had been enough to overwhelm standard Dominion defenses, but this was something different. This walker was a moving fortress, and expected them to fight conventionally, expected them to fire at it from range, to chip away at its defenses. So they wouldn't. He switched to company-wide comms. Asterisk, asterisk, all tanks focus fire on the legs. Asterisk, asterisk, aim for the joints. Asterisk, asterisk, we take this bastard off its feet. Asterisk, asterisk. The crews adjusted targeting, and a second later, the battlefield roared with cannon fire. Shield breaker rounds detonated against the siege walker's lower plating, sending ripples across its shielded legs. But even as the shields flickered, the armor held, dense plating absorbing the secondary penetrators without giving way. Dempsey's tank swerved behind cover as the walker's massive cannon rotated toward him. The plasma weapon charged, energy crackling at its core. Then Vasquez's voice cut in. "Wait, sir, I have an idea. But it's insane." Dempsey barely dodged another blast. "Then, it's probably our best shot. Spit it out." Vasquez was already moving, running toward a damaged Abrams with an exposed ammunition rack. "That thing's shield can hold against direct impacts, but what if we detonate a shield breaker inside its defenses?" Dempsey caught on immediately. "You're talking close-quarters detonation." Vasquez nodded frantically as he climbed onto the wrecked tank, hauling out an undetonated shield breaker round. "We'd have to get around underneath its main hull, right where the shield is weakest. If we set off the EMP at that range, it could disrupt the power core itself." McBride laughed, half in disbelief. "You want to plant a bomb on a walking superweapon? That's a new level of crazy, man." Carter's voice was grim. We don't have another option. Dempsey's decision was instant. Vasquez, get that charge prepped. McBride, cover his approach. Carter, give me a firing solution. I'm going to distract that thing. The Abrams roared forward, Dempsey taking the lead. Plasma blasts ripped through the battlefield, barely missing as he wove through the wreckage, drawing the siege walker's attention. McBride followed behind, providing cover fire. Every second counted. Vasquez ran, sprinting toward the underbelly of the towering machine lugging the massive round behind him. Sparks showered down as Dominion drones descended, attempting to stop him. McBride's turret swiveled, twin .50 caliber machine guns roaring, shredding the drones mid-air. Vasquez slid under the walker, heart pounding. The humming of its shield was deafening, a wall of energy distorting the air. He set the round against the armor plating, fingers shaking as he activated the timer. Then the siege walker shifted. The massive leg lifted off the ground, preparing for another step. If it moved now, the bomb wouldn't detonate in the right spot. Vasquez's breath hitched. There was only one way to keep it still. "Sir," he whispered into the comm, "tell my mom I." Then he grabbed the round's manual override and held it in place with his own body. The detonation was blinding. The EMP ripped through the siege walker's shields, disrupting its core systems for a split second. And that second was enough. Dempsey fired the final shot. The 120mm tungsten sabot round pierced the exposed hull, reaching deep into the power core. The explosion tore upward from within, a shockwave splitting the sky apart as the walker collapsed, its massive form crashing into the ruins of the colony. A long silence followed. McBride was the first to break it, voice hollow. "Vasquez." No answer. Dempsey sat still, staring at the smoking wreckage. He already knew. The battle was over. The Dominion had been defeated. But the price had been steep. Carter let out a breath. "We just did the impossible." Dempsey finally spoke, his voice heavy. "We proved we belong out here." And as the dust settled, as the remaining Dominion forces retreated into orbit, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never underestimate human armor again.